The Ice King kidnaps princesses. He has done it for as long as anyone in the land of Wu can remember. Again and again, compulsively. The same act repeated past all reason, past every failure, past the obvious fact that it never works and never could. He kidnaps a princess, he is defeated, he is returned to his lonely ice tower. And then, before long, he does it again, the same compulsion driving the same doomed act. Over and over, a loop he cannot break. For most of the show, this is played as a joke, the bumbling villain and his pointless repeated scheme. But look at it directly, without the comedy, and it is something else entirely. It is a compulsion. It is an obsession. It is a man trapped in a loop he cannot escape, reaching again and again for something he can never grasp, unable to stop, unable to learn, driven by a fixation that has consumed his life. The Ice King has an obsession problem, and it is the key to who he is, the lens through which his whole tragic story comes into focus. Beneath the comedy of the princess kidnapping is a genuine and painful study of obsession, of compulsion, of the way a fixation can take over a mind and trap it in loops it cannot break, of the way longing, untreated and amplified, can curdle into something pathological. And the Ice King's obsession is not random. It has a source, a meaning, a tragic origin in the man he used to be and the curse that destroyed him. To understand the Ice King's obsession problem is to understand the deepest tragedy in Wu, the way a good man's love became a broken man's compulsion, the way devotion, under the influence of a curse, became obsession. Tonight, we're going to study that obsession, carefully and with compassion, the Ice King's obsession problem, and everything it reveals. We will look at the compulsive kidnapping and what drives it, the crown that amplified his fixations, the man he used to be and the love he lost, the way his obsession is displaced longing for connection, the fan fiction world he obsessively builds, the relationship between obsession and loneliness, the difference between obsession and love, and the tragedy and the eventual recovery. We will treat his obsession not as a joke and not as a flaw to be mocked, but as a genuine psychological condition to be understood with compassion. Because the Ice King's obsession problem is, beneath the comedy, one of the most honest depictions of obsession and compulsion in animation, and it deserves to be understood with the care that real suffering deserves. Welcome to Pine Hat. Let's begin. Start with the compulsion itself, the princess kidnapping, because its very structure reveals what obsession is. An obsession is not a choice. It is a compulsion, a drive that overrides reason, that repeats past all evidence of its futility, that cannot be stopped by the obvious fact that it does not work. The Ice King kidnaps princesses not because it ever succeeds, not because it brings him what he wants, but because he cannot stop, because the compulsion drives him past reason, past failure, past learning, into the same doomed act again and again. This is the signature of genuine obsession, the repetition past all reason, the inability to stop despite the evident futility, the compulsion that overrides the mind's clear knowledge that the act will fail. The Ice King's kidnapping is obsession rendered accurately, the doomed compulsive loop that no amount of failure can break. And the futility is part of the tragedy because the Ice King's compulsion can never give him what he actually wants. He kidnaps princesses seeking companionship, love, connection, an end to his terrible loneliness. But kidnapping can never produce these things, can only produce fear and resistance and his own inevitable defeat. The obsession is aimed at a goal it can never achieve, the compulsive act structurally incapable of satisfying the longing that drives it, so that the Ice King is trapped not just in repetition, but in a repetition that can never succeed, reaching compulsively for connection through an act that guarantees isolation. This is the cruelest structure of obsession, the compulsion aimed at a goal it can never reach, the doomed reaching that can only ever produce the opposite of what it seeks. So the Ice King's princess kidnapping is, looked at directly, a portrait of obsession at its most tragic, a compulsion that repeats past all reason and aims at a goal it can never achieve. A man trapped in a doomed loop, reaching forever for a connection his very method makes impossible. And the comedy that usually surrounds it conceals this tragedy, lets the audience laugh at the bumbling villain rather than ache for the trapped and compulsive man. But the tragedy is there, beneath the comedy, the genuine portrait of obsession. And to see it clearly is to stop laughing and start understanding. To recognize in the Ice King's compulsive kidnapping not a joke but a genuine and painful depiction of what it is to be trapped in an obsession you cannot escape, reaching forever for what you can never grasp. The source of the Ice King's obsession is the crown, the cursed artifact that destroyed Simon Petrikov. And understanding the crown's effect is essential to understanding his obsession problem. The crown grants power and visions and slowly erodes the mind. And crucially, it does not erase the mind evenly but warps it, amplifying certain tendencies while destroying others, leaving behind not a blank, but a distortion, a mind reduced to its most obsessive fragments. The crown took Simon's reason, his memory, his balanced self, and left behind his fixations amplified and unmoored. So that the Ice King is what remains when a mind is stripped of everything but its obsessions, the compulsive fragments left after the crown has eaten the rest. The crown is the engine of his obsession, the curse that reduced a whole man to his amplified fixations. This is a crucial insight into obsession, that it can be what remains when a mind is damaged, the fixations amplified and unmoored as the balancing faculties are destroyed. A healthy mind holds its tendencies in balance, its devotions checked by reason, its fixations moderated by perspective. The crown destroyed Simon's balance, his reason, his perspective, and left his devotions and fixations amplified and unchecked, so that the Ice King's obsession is the result of a mind that has lost the faculties that once moderated its fixations. The crown reveals that obsession can be a kind of damage, the amplification of fixation that follows the destruction of the faculties that once held it in check, the compulsive remnant of a mind that has lost its balance. And the specific obsession the crown amplified in Simon was his devotion, because Simon before the crown was a deeply devoted man, devoted to his studies, devoted to his fiancée Betty, devoted after the apocalypse to protecting a young girl named Marceline. Devotion was Simon's defining quality, his capacity for deep, loyal, self-giving love. And the crown took this beautiful quality and amplified it past all balance, turned his healthy devotion into pathological obsession, his loyal love into compulsive fixation. The Ice King's obsession is Simon's devotion distorted, the beautiful capacity for loyal love amplified by the crown into compulsive fixation. The best quality of the man become the defining symptom of the broken creature. There is a terrible irony in this that the Ice King's obsession problem grew from Simon's greatest virtue, that the compulsive fixation is the wreckage of a beautiful devotion, that the best thing about the man became, under the curse, the symptom of his destruction. Simon's capacity for deep devoted love, which made him kind and loyal and protective, was exactly the quality the crown amplified into pathology, so that the Ice King's obsession is not the corruption of something bad, but the distortion of something good, the beautiful devotion of a loving man twisted by the curse into compulsive fixation. The obsession is the wreckage of love, the distortion of devotion, the best quality of Simon become the defining damage of the Ice King. This origin reframes the Ice King's obsession entirely, because it means his compulsion is not a flaw in his character, but the wreckage of his virtue, the distortion of his capacity for love, the amplification of his devotion past all balance by the curse that destroyed him. To understand the Ice King's obsession is to understand it as the ruin of something beautiful, the devoted loving man's best quality twisted into pathology, the compulsion that is the wreckage of his love. And this understanding transforms the comedy of the princess kidnapping into tragedy, because the compulsion is revealed as the ruin of Simon's devotion, the obsessive reaching for connection, the distortion of a loving man's capacity for love. The joke become the symptom of a beautiful soul's destruction. So the crown is the engine of the Ice King's obsession, and the obsession itself is the wreckage of Simon's devotion, his beautiful capacity for loyal love amplified by the curse into compulsive fixation. The obsession problem is, at its root, a love problem, the distortion of a devoted man's love into pathological compulsion, the curse turning the best quality of Simon into the defining symptom of the Ice King. And to understand this is to understand the Ice King's obsession with the compassion it deserves, not as a flaw to be mocked, but as the wreckage of a beautiful devotion, the tragic distortion of a loving man's greatest virtue into the compulsion that defines his broken existence. The princess kidnapping, understood as displaced devotion, reveals its true object, because the Ice King is not really reaching for the princesses at all, but for the love he lost, the connection the crown took from him, the devotion that has no proper object anymore. Simon was devoted to Betty, his fiancée, and to the young Marceline he protected. And the crown took these loves from him, erased the people his devotion was attached to, leaving the devotion itself intact but unmoored, a love with no object, reaching compulsively for any substitute. The princess kidnapping is this unmoored devotion seeking an object, the lost love reaching for any replacement, the obsession aimed at princesses because its true objects, Betty and Marceline, have been taken from him by the curse. This is the deepest meaning of the Ice King's obsession, that it is displaced longing, love that has lost its object reaching compulsively for substitutes, devotion unmoored from the people it once attached to, seeking desperately for anything to attach to. The princesses are not the real object of his obsession. They are stand-ins, substitutes, the unmoored devotion's desperate reaching for any replacement for the love the crown erased. And this makes his compulsion unbearably poignant. The lost love reaching forever for substitutes. The unmoored devotion seeking compulsively for the connection it lost. The obsession a doomed search for replacements for a love that can never be replaced. The Fiona and Cake fanfiction is another expression of this displaced longing, perhaps the most revealing of all. The Ice King writes stories, obsessively, about a world with a gender-swapped version of himself, the Ice Queen, and a brave heroine, Fiona, and in these stories he writes a version of himself who is wanted, who is loved, who gets the connection he cannot get in reality. The fanfiction is the obsession turned to creation, the unmoored longing building. In words, the love it cannot find in life. The Ice King obsessively writing the connection he obsessively fails to achieve. It is the same longing, the same displaced devotion, expressed now not in kidnapping, but in creation. The lonely man obsessively building a world where he is loved. There is something both sadder and more hopeful in the fanfiction obsession than in the kidnapping, because where the kidnapping is doomed and destructive, the fanfiction is creative, the same longing channeled into making something rather than harming someone. The Ice King's obsessive writing is his longing turned to art, the displaced devotion building worlds rather than kidnapping people, the compulsion channeled into creation. And this suggests that even obsession, even compulsive longing, can be channeled toward creation rather than destruction. That the same drive that produces the doomed kidnapping can produce the poignant fanfiction, the longing turned to art rather than harm. The fanfiction is the Ice King's obsession at its least harmful and most creative, the lonely longing building beauty rather than causing damage. And the fanfiction reveals with particular clarity what the Ice King's obsession is really seeking, because in his stories he writes exactly what he longs for, a version of himself who is loved, who is wanted, who has the connection he lacks. The fanfiction is a window into the heart of his obsession, the longing made explicit in the stories he writes, the desperate wish for love and connection that drives all his compulsive behavior laid bare in the worlds he obsessively creates. To read the Ice King's fanfiction is to see the heart of his obsession, the longing for love that drives everything, the displaced devotion seeking, in fiction as in kidnapping, the connection the crown took from him. So the Ice King's obsession, in both the kidnapping and the fanfiction, is displaced longing, love that lost its object reaching compulsively for substitutes, and building, in fiction, the connection it cannot find in life. The princesses and the fanfiction are both substitutes, both expressions of the same unmoored devotion, the same desperate reaching for the love the crown erased. And understanding this, the obsession as displaced longing makes the Ice King unbearably sympathetic, the compulsive behavior revealed as the doomed reaching of a man whose love was taken from him. The obsession the symptom of a devotion with nowhere to go, reaching forever, in kidnapping and in fiction, for the connection it lost. The Ice King's obsession is bound up with his loneliness, and the relationship between them is one of the show's quietest psychological insights. Because loneliness breeds obsession, the two feeding each other in a worsening spiral. The Ice King is profoundly lonely, isolated in his ice tower, cut off from genuine connection by his madness and his behavior. And this loneliness fuels his obsessive reaching for connection, which in turn, through the destructive form it takes, deepens his isolation, driving away the very connection he obsessively seeks. Loneliness drives the obsession. The obsession deepens the loneliness, and the Ice King is trapped in the spiral, his isolation breeding the compulsion that worsens his isolation. This spiral is a genuine and painful psychological truth. The way isolation can breed compulsive behaviors that deepen isolation, the way the lonely sometimes reach for connection in ways that drive it further away. The Ice King embodies this spiral, the lonely man whose obsessive reaching for connection only deepens his loneliness, whose compulsion to end his isolation only worsens it. And the show depicts this with real insight. The worsening spiral of loneliness and obsession, the way the isolated reach compulsively for connection in ways that isolate them further, the trap that the lonely can fall into, reaching for connection through behaviors that guarantee its absence. The Ice King's obsession problem is, at its root, a loneliness problem, the compulsion bred by isolation and deepening it in turn. This points to the relationship between obsession and love, the crucial difference between them, because the Ice King's obsession is often mistaken, by himself and others, for love when it is in fact love's distortion, its opposite in important ways. Love seeks the good of the beloved, obsession seeks the satisfaction of the self. Love respects the freedom of the other, obsession seeks to possess. Love can let go, obsession cannot. The Ice King's princess kidnapping is obsession masquerading as love. the desire to possess mistaken for the desire to cherish, the compulsion to grasp mistaken for the wish to love. And the difference matters enormously, because obsession, however it feels from inside, is not love but its distortion, the grasping that love is not, the possession that love refuses. Understanding this difference is crucial to understanding the Ice King's tragedy, because his obsession is the distortion of his capacity for love, the grasping compulsion that the crown made of his devoted heart. Simon could love, truly, devotedly, with respect for the beloved and the capacity to let go. The Ice King can only obsess, grasp, possess, the loving devotion distorted into compulsive fixation. And the tragedy is the distance between them, between Simon's true love and the Ice King's obsession, between the devoted heart and the grasping compulsion, the crown having turned the one into the other, love into obsession into fixation, the capacity to cherish into the compulsion to possess. This distinction also illuminates the broader truth that obsession, though it feels like intense love, is actually a failure of love, a distortion that grasps where love would cherish, possesses where love would free, clings where love would let go. The intensity of obsession can be mistaken for the depth of love, but they are different things, even opposite things. Obsession, the self-centered grasping that love transcends, the possession that love refuses, the clinging that love releases. And the Ice King embodies this distinction. His obsession, the distortion of love, the intense grasping compulsion that is not love but its failure, the clinging that love, in its health, transcends. To understand the Ice King is to understand that obsession is not love but its distortion, the grasping that love is not. So, the Ice King's obsession problem is bound up with his loneliness, which breeds it, and distinct from love, which it distorts, the compulsion bred by isolation and mistaken for the love it is actually the failure of. He is lonely, and his loneliness breeds his obsession, which deepens his loneliness, and his obsession feels like love but is its distortion, the grasping compulsion that love transcends. And to understand both, the loneliness that breeds the obsession and the difference between obsession and love, is to understand the Ice King's condition with real psychological clarity, the lonely man trapped in a compulsion that distorts his capacity for love, reaching obsessively for a connection his obsession cannot achieve, because obsession is not love, but its failure. The tragedy of the Ice King's obsession deepens when you consider what it cost, not just him but everyone around him. The way his compulsion isolated him from the very connection he sought, drove away the people who might have loved him, trapped him in a loneliness his obsession only deepened. The obsession cost him everything, the connection he longed for, the love he sought, the life he might have had, all sacrificed to a compulsion he could not control. And it cost others too, the princesses he frightened, the people he troubled, the relationships he could not form because the obsession stood between him and genuine connection. The Ice King's obsession is a tragedy of cost, the compulsion that took everything, that sacrificed the very connection it sought, that left the man more alone for all his desperate reaching. There is a particular cruelty in the way the obsession sabotages its own goal, the way the Ice King's compulsive reaching for connection guarantees his isolation, the way the very intensity of his obsessive longing drives away the love he seeks. This is the deepest cruelty of obsession, that it defeats itself, that the compulsive reaching for a goal makes the goal impossible, that the intensity of the longing guarantees the absence of its object. The Ice King wants connection more than anything, and his obsession with connection is exactly what makes connection impossible. The compulsion sabotaging its own goal, the longing defeating itself, the desperate reaching guaranteeing the absence of what it reaches for. This self-sabotaging cruelty is the heart of the Ice King's tragedy, the obsession that defeats the very thing it seeks. And yet the show offers, in the end, a recovery, a lifting of the obsession. Because when the crown finally comes off, when Simon is at last restored, the obsession lifts, the compulsion ends, the man beneath the fixation returns. The recovery reveals that the obsession was never Simon, but the crown's distortion of him, that beneath the compulsion was a whole man whose devotion was healthy, whose love was true, whose capacity for connection was intact. When the crown comes off and Simon returns, the obsession is gone, revealed as the curse's distortion rather than the man's nature, and the recovered Simon can love truly, connect genuinely, devote himself healthily, the obsession lifted with the curse that caused it. The recovery is the proof that the obsession was the crown's doing, not Simon's nature, the distortion lifting when the cause is removed. This recovery is profoundly hopeful because it suggests that obsession, even severe obsession, is not the person's true nature, but a distortion that might be lifted, a condition that might be treated, a curse that might be removed to reveal the whole healthy person beneath. The Ice King's obsession lifts when the crown comes off, revealing Simon's healthy, devoted self. And this offers hope about obsession in general. The suggestion that beneath even severe compulsion is a whole person whose true nature is not the obsession, but the health the obsession obscures. The recovery is hope for the obsessed, the reassurance that the obsession is not their true self, but a distortion that might be lifted, revealing the whole healthy person beneath the compulsion. There is deep compassion in this vision of obsession, the understanding that the obsessed person is not their obsession, that beneath the compulsion is a whole person worthy of love, that the obsession is a condition to be treated with compassion rather than a flaw to be condemned. The show treats the Ice King's obsession this way, with compassion as a condition rather than a character flaw, a distortion of a good man rather than the nature of a bad one, and it asks the audience to extend the same compassion, to see the obsessed as suffering rather than failing, as distorted rather than evil, as worthy of compassion and treatment rather than condemnation. The Ice King's obsession problem is, the show insists, a problem to be met with compassion, a suffering to be understood, a distortion to be treated, not a flaw to be mocked. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This compassionate vision of obsession extends, of course, to the real world, to the real people who struggle with compulsions and fixations and obsessive conditions, who deserve, like the Ice King, to be seen as suffering rather than failing, as whole people distorted by a condition rather than defined by it. The show's treatment of the Ice King's obsession is a lesson in compassion for the obsessed, the understanding that compulsion is suffering, that the obsessed person is whole beneath their condition, that obsession deserves compassion and treatment rather than mockery and condemnation. And this lesson is valuable. The compassionate vision of obsession the show offers through the Ice King, the understanding that those who struggle with compulsion are suffering and whole and worthy of the compassion the show extends to its broken blue wizard. So the Ice King's obsession, in its tragedy and its recovery, teaches both the cost of obsession and the hope of recovery, the way compulsion sabotages itself and isolates the sufferer, and the way it might be lifted to reveal the whole person beneath. And it teaches, throughout, compassion, the understanding that obsession is suffering rather than failing, that the obsessed person is whole beneath their condition, that compulsion deserves compassion. The Ice King's obsession problem is fully understood, a study in compassion for the obsessed, the tragic compulsion met with understanding, the suffering seen rather than mocked, the whole person honored beneath the distortion, the hope of recovery held out, the compassion extended that all suffering deserves. The Ice King's obsession speaks to something in all of us because everyone knows, in some smaller measure, the experience of obsession, the fixation that will not let go, the compulsive return to a thought or a longing or a behavior, the loop the mind falls into and cannot escape. We all have our smaller obsessions, our fixations, our compulsive loops, the thoughts we cannot stop thinking, the longings we cannot stop feeling, the behaviors we repeat past reason. And the Ice King, in his extremity, is a mirror of these smaller obsessions, the universal human tendency toward fixation magnified into a defining condition, the compulsive loops we all know rendered in their fullest tragic form. To recognize the Ice King's obsession in our own smaller fixations is to understand him with a personal compassion, to see in his extremity the magnified form of something we ourselves experience, the fixation that will not let go, the longing that loops, the compulsion that returns. And this recognition deepens our compassion for him and for ourselves, the understanding that obsession is a universal human tendency, that we all know the loops and the fixations, that the Ice King's extremity is our own smaller tendency magnified. We are all, in smaller ways, the Ice King caught in our own fixations, reaching compulsively for our own longings, and to recognize this is to extend compassion both to him and to ourselves, the fellow sufferers of the universal human tendency toward obsession. There is comfort in this recognition, the comfort of not being alone in our fixations, of seeing our own compulsive tendencies reflected and understood in a beloved character, of finding our smaller obsessions given form and met with compassion, to struggle with our own fixations and find them mirrored in the Ice King, met with the show's compassion, is to feel less alone in them, to find our compulsive tendencies understood rather than condemned, to receive, through the show's compassion for the Ice King, a compassion for our own obsessive struggles. The Ice King's obsession, met with compassion, offers comfort to everyone who struggles with their own fixations, the reassurance that obsession is human, that the obsessed are worthy of compassion, that we are not alone in our compulsive loops. And the Ice King's recovery offers hope for our own fixations, the suggestion that obsession is not destiny, that the compulsive loops might be broken, that beneath our fixations is a whole self that might be freed. If the Ice King's obsession could lift, if Simon could be recovered, then our own smaller obsessions might also be eased, our own fixations loosened, our own compulsive loops broken, revealing the whole selves beneath them. The Ice King's recovery is hope for the obsessed, the reassurance that the loops might be broken, that the fixations might be eased, that beneath even severe obsession is a whole self that might be freed, as Simon was freed when the crown came off. The recovery offers hope for our own fixations, the suggestion that obsession need not be permanent, that the whole self might be recovered from beneath the compulsion. This hope is gentle and important, because obsession can feel permanent, inescapable, like a loop that will never break, and the Ice King's recovery offers the reassurance that that the fixation might lift, that the compulsion might ease, that the whole self might be recovered. For anyone caught in their own loops, their own fixations, their own compulsive returns, the Ice King's recovery offers the gentle hope that the loops might break, that the obsession might lift, that beneath the fixation is a whole self that might, like Simon, be freed. The recovery is the show's gift to the obsessed, the gentle hope that the compulsion is not permanent, that the loops might break, that the whole self waits to be recovered beneath the fixation. So the Ice King's obsession problem, in mirroring our own smaller fixations and offering the hope of recovery, becomes a source of both compassion and hope, the understanding that obsession is human, and the reassurance that it might be eased. We recognize our own fixations in his extremity, meet them with the compassion the show extends to him, and receive the hope his recovery offers, that the loops might break, that the whole self might be freed. The Ice King's obsession is, finally, a mirror and a comfort and a hope, the universal human tendency toward fixation magnified and met with compassion, and offered the hope of recovery, the broken blue wizard a companion in our own struggles with the loops and longings that we, in smaller ways, all know. And there is a particular gentleness in contemplating obsession at the edge of sleep, because the mind drifting toward rest often loosens its own fixations, releases the loops that gripped it in the day, lets the compulsive thoughts soften and fade. Sleep is, among other things, a release from the day's fixations, a loosening of the loops, a gentle freeing from the obsessions that gripped the waking mind. And to contemplate the Ice King's obsession as you drift toward this release is to be reminded that the loops can loosen, the fixations can fade, the compulsions can ease, that sleep itself offers a nightly recovery from the obsessions of the day, a gentle freeing that mirrors the larger recovery Simon found. Let the loops loosen now the way they loosen towards sleep, and rest in the gentle freeing that the night offers from the fixations of the day. To understand the Ice King's obsession fully, you have to know the love it grew from, and that love was Betty, Simon's fiancée, the woman he was devoted to before the crown took him. Simon's devotion to Betty was the healthy form of equality that would become his obsession, a deep, loyal, loving devotion to the woman he meant to marry, the beautiful capacity for love that defined him before the curse. And when the crown took Simon, it took Betty from him, or took him from Betty, the devotion losing its object as the crown erased the man who held it, leaving the loving devotion unmoored, reaching, eventually, for the princess, substitutes that could never be Betty. The Ice King's obsession is, at its root, the wreckage of his love for Betty, the devotion to his lost fiancée distorted by the crown into compulsive reaching for substitutes. This origin makes the obsession unbearably poignant because it began as the most beautiful kind of love, a man's devotion to the woman he meant to marry, and became, through the curse, the doomed compulsive kidnapping of substitutes. The love for Betty was real, healthy, beautiful, and the crown turned it into the Ice King's obsession, the devotion to a beloved fiancé distorted into compulsive fixation on stand-ins. And to know this is to see the princess kidnapping differently, not as the random compulsion of a villain, but as the wreckage of a love story, the distorted remnant of Simon's devotion to Betty, the obsession that is the ruin of his most beautiful love. Simon's devotion showed itself again in his protection of Marceline, the young girl he found and cared for in the ruins after the Mushroom War, the child he kept safe even as the crown was taking his mind. Here the devotion was at its most heroic, a man losing his mind still protecting a frightened child, his devotion holding even as his self dissolved, the loving care persisting even into the early madness. And this devotion to Marceline shows the beauty of the quality that would become the obsession, the deep loving care that defined Simon, the devotion that protected a child even as the crown destroyed him. The Ice King's obsession is the distortion of this same devotion, the loving care that protected Marceline twisted by the curse into the compulsion that kidnaps princesses. The relationship between Simon and the young Marceline is among the most moving in the show, precisely because it shows the devotion at its best, the loving care that the obsession would later distort, the beautiful quality of the man before the curse finished its work. Simon protected Marceline out of pure, devoted love, even as he was losing himself. And this love was real and beautiful and selfless, the devotion at its healthiest. And to know this is to understand what the obsession is the ruin of, the beautiful, selfless devotion that protected a child, distorted by the crown into the selfish compulsion that grasps at substitutes. The obsession is the wreckage of the devotion that protected Marceline. The loving care become compulsive fixation. The selfless devotion becomes selfish grasping. The show documented Simon's decline with particular poignancy in the episode where his recorded video diaries are found. The tapes on which Simon, as the crown was taking him, recorded himself, documenting his own dissolution with the careful thoroughness of a scholar cataloging his own destruction. These recordings show the man fighting to hold on to himself even as the crown took him, documenting his decline, trying to leave a record of who he was before the obsession consumed him. And there is something both heartbreaking and revealing in this obsessive self-documentation, the man compulsively recording his own dissolution. The scholar's devotion to his work, turning even in his destruction toward the obsessive cataloging of his own end. The recordings are Simon's devotion turned toward documenting his own loss, the obsessive thoroughness of a man trying to preserve himself even as he disappears. These recordings are crucial to understanding the Ice King's obsession because they show the man beneath it, the Simon fighting to hold on to himself, the devotion still intact even as the crown took everything else. Beneath the Ice King's compulsive kidnapping is the Simon of the recordings, the man who fought to preserve himself, whose devotion was real, whose love for Betty and Marceline was beautiful, whose obsession is the wreckage of all of this, the distortion of a devoted, loving man by a curse that took everything but his fixations. The recordings show the whole man beneath the obsession. The Simon the Ice King's compulsion is the ruin of the devoted, loving scholar whose beautiful capacity for love the crown twisted into the compulsion that defines his broken existence. So the Ice King's obsession grew from Simon's love, his devotion to Betty, and his protection of Marceline, and his desperate self-documentation. The beautiful, loving, devoted man whose best quality the crown distorted into compulsive fixation. The obsession is the wreckage of this love, the ruin of this devotion, the distortion of the beautiful capacity for love that defined Simon before the curse. And to know the love the obsession grew from is to understand the Ice King with the deepest compassion, the compulsive kidnapper revealed as the wreckage of a devoted, loving man, the obsession, the ruin of a beautiful love, the broken blue wizard, the distorted remnant of the kind devoted scholar who loved Betty and protected Marceline and fought even in his dissolution to preserve the loving self the crown was taking from him. The Ice King is the show's clearest study of obsession, but he is not its only one, and seeing his obsession alongside the others clarifies what the show is saying about fixation more broadly. Princess Bubblegum has her own obsessions, her compulsive need for control, her fixation on order and stability, her inability to stop managing and watching and engineering. Marceline carries obsessive attachments, her thousand-year fixations, her inability to let go of certain losses. Betty becomes consumed by an obsession, her fixation on saving Simon driving her to terrible extremes. The Land of O is full of obsessives, and the Ice King is their clearest case, the fixation that defines a whole existence, but he is part of a larger pattern. The show's recurring interest in how fixation grips and shapes and sometimes consumes its characters. Seeing these obsessions together reveals the show's nuanced view of fixation, the way it can be destructive or productive, pathological or noble, depending on its object and its degree. Bubblegum's obsessive control protects her people even as it isolates her. Marceline's obsessive attachments are both her wound and her loyalty. Betty's obsessive love is both her tragedy and her devotion. The show does not view obsession simply as merely a flaw, but sees its complexity the way fixation can be both damage and devotion, both pathology and love, both the thing that destroys and the thing that drives. And the Ice King's obsession, seen among these, is revealed in its full complexity. The destructive compulsion that is also the wreckage of a beautiful devotion, the pathology that is also the distorted form of love. This nuanced view of obsession connects to the show's deepest themes, because obsession is at root about attachment, about the inability to let go, and the show is profoundly interested in attachment and letting go, in the tension between holding on and releasing. The Ice King cannot let go, cannot release his fixations, cannot stop reaching for the connection he lost, and this inability to let go is the heart of his obsession. And the show throughout explores this tension, the difficulty of letting go, the way attachment can become fixation, the way holding on can become obsession, the wisdom and the difficulty of release. The Ice King's obsession is the extreme case of the universal difficulty of letting go, the fixation that cannot release, the attachment that has become compulsion. The show's wisdom about this is that healthy attachment requires the capacity to let go, that love holds without clinging, that devotion releases what it cannot keep, that the difference between love and obsession is precisely the capacity to let go. The Ice King cannot let go, and so his attachment is obsession. The healthier characters can release what they cannot keep, and so their attachments are love. And the show suggests that the capacity to let go is what keeps attachment healthy, what prevents love from becoming obsession, what allows devotion to remain devotion rather than curdling into fixation. The Ice King's tragedy is the loss of this capacity, the crown having taken his ability to let go, leaving him with attachment that cannot release, love that has become compulsion. This is a profound insight into the nature of healthy love, that it requires the capacity to let go, that holding on too tightly turns love into obsession, that the willingness to release what we cannot keep is what keeps our attachments healthy. The Ice King, unable to let go, shows what attachment becomes without this capacity, the fixation that grips and cannot release, the love that has become compulsion. And the healthier characters, able to let go, show what attachment can be with it, the love that holds without clinging, the devotion that releases what it cannot keep. The contrast teaches the show's wisdom about love, that it requires the capacity to let go, that the difference between devotion and obsession is the willingness to release. For anyone who has struggled with their own inability to let go, their own fixations, their own attachments that have become compulsions, the Ice King offers both recognition and a gentle teaching. The recognition of the difficulty of letting go, and the teaching that healthy love requires it. We all struggle sometimes with letting go, with releasing what we cannot keep, with the attachments that grip too tightly. And the Ice King is the extreme mirror of this struggle, the fixation that cannot release. And his story teaches, gently, that the capacity to let go is what keeps love healthy, that releasing what we cannot keep is not the failure of love, but its health, that to hold without clinging is the wisdom that prevents devotion from becoming obsession. The Ice King teaches, through his tragic inability, the value of the capacity to let go. So the Ice King's obsession, seen among the show's other obsessions and connected to its themes of attachment and release, reveals the show's nuanced wisdom about fixation and love. The understanding that obsession is attachment that cannot let go, that healthy love requires the capacity to release, that the difference between devotion and obsession is the willingness to let go. And this wisdom is valuable, the teaching that healthy love holds without clinging, that the capacity to release what we cannot keep is what keeps our attachments healthy, that to let go is not the failure of love, but its health. The Ice King, unable to let go, teaches by his tragic inability the value of the capacity to release, the wisdom that keeps love from becoming the obsession that consumed him. The deepest comfort of the Ice King story comes at the very end of the show, when Simon is at last restored, the crown's hold finally broken. The man recovered from beneath the obsession. After 1,000 years of being lost, after 1,000 years of compulsive kidnapping and unmoored longing, Simon returns. Himself again, the obsession lifted. The man recovered. And the moment is profoundly moving precisely because we have followed the obsession for so long, watched the compulsion for so many years, that the lifting of it, the recovery of the man beneath, lands with the full weight of 1,000 years of waiting. Simon's return is the show's deepest reward for following the Ice King's tragedy. The man recovered from beneath the obsession, the love restored from beneath the compulsion. Simon's restoration reveals finally and fully what the obsession had obscured, the whole loving, devoted man beneath the compulsive fixation the Simon the Ice King's obsession was the ruin of. When Simon returns, we see at last the man the crown took, the kind, devoted scholar, the loving fiancé, the protector of children, the whole self that the obsession had buried for 1,000 years. And the recovery confirms everything the obsession had hidden, that beneath the compulsion was a whole man, that the obsession was the curse's distortion and not the man's nature, that the loving, devoted Simon was there all along, buried beneath the fixation, waiting to be recovered. Simon's return is the revelation of the whole man beneath the obsession, the love restored from beneath the compulsion, the proof that the obsession was never who he truly was. This recovery offers the deepest hope of the whole story, the reassurance that even 1,000 years of obsession could not destroy the man beneath, that the loving, devoted self survived the entire span of the compulsion, that the obsession, however total and however long, was distortion rather than destruction, the man preserved beneath it all along. If Simon could survive 1,000 years of obsession and be recovered whole, then the self always survives beneath the fixation. The love always persists beneath the compulsion. The obsession never finally destroys the loving self it obscures. Simon's recovery is the show's deepest hope about obsession. The reassurance that the self survives beneath it, that the love persists, that even 1,000 years of compulsion cannot finally destroy the whole loving person waiting to be recovered. There is comfort in this for anyone who fears their own fixations might define them, might destroy them, might be who they truly are. Because Simon's recovery insists that the obsession is not the self, that beneath even the longest compulsion is a whole loving person, that the fixation is distortion rather than identity. You are not your obsessions is your whole self. The compulsion is not who you are, but a distortion of it. And the self, the loving self, survives beneath the fixation waiting, as Simon waited, to be recovered. This is a profound comfort for the obsessed, the reassurance that the obsession is not the self, that the loving person survives beneath it, that recovery, however long it takes, remains possible. And the love that finally helped to recover Simon, the persistent love of Marceline and others who never stopped seeing the man beneath the Ice King, who held on to Simon even through the 1,000 years of obsession, points to how recovery happens through the persistent love of others who see the self beneath the fixation. Simon was recovered not alone but through the love that never gave up on him. The friends who saw Simon beneath the Ice King, who held on to the man beneath the obsession, whose persistent love helped to call him back. And this suggests that recovery from obsession, like so much healing in the show, happens through love, through the persistent care of others who see the self beneath the fixation and refuse to give up on it, who hold on to the person beneath the compulsion until they can be recovered. The love of others is what recovers the self from beneath the obsession. This is a beautiful and hopeful vision of how the obsessed might be helped, not by condemnation or abandonment, but by the persistent love that sees the self beneath the fixation, that holds on to the person beneath the compulsion, that refuses to give up until recovery becomes possible. Marceline never stopped seeing Simon beneath the Ice King, and her persistent love was part of what made his recovery possible. And this models how we might help those caught in their own obsessions, not by giving up on them, but by seeing the self beneath the fixation, holding on to the person beneath the compulsion, loving them until recovery becomes possible. The recovery of Simon through persistent love is the show's gentle teaching about how the obsessed might be helped, through the love that sees and holds and refuses to give up. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So, the Ice King's story ends in the deepest hope. Simon recovered from beneath 1,000 years of obsession through the persistent love of those who saw him beneath the fixation. The self restored, the love recovered, the compulsion lifted at last. And this ending offers the deepest comfort, the reassurance that the self survives beneath obsession, that recovery is possible, that the persistent love of others can call the whole person back from beneath the fixation. The Ice King's obsession problem ends not in tragedy but in recovery. The man restored from beneath the compulsion, and this recovery is the gift of his whole story. The hope that the self survives beneath obsession, that love can recover it, that even 1,000 years of fixation cannot finally destroy the whole loving person waiting all along to be recovered. It is worth recognizing the Ice King as a genuine landmark in how animation has depicted mental struggle, because the show's treatment of his condition, the obsession and the decline and the loss of self, is among the most honest and compassionate portrayals of mental suffering ever attempted in the medium. The Ice King's condition, the crown's erosion of his mind, reads to many viewers as a depiction of dementia, of cognitive decline, of the slow loss of self that some of the most feared conditions inflict. And the show portrays it with a seriousness and a compassion rare in any medium, let alone a children's cartoon. The Ice King is a landmark depiction of mental struggle. The obsession and the decline rendered with honesty and compassion, the suffering portrayed with the seriousness it deserves. This landmark portrayal has a destigmatizing power, because to depict mental struggle with compassion, to show the whole person beneath the condition, to portray the suffering with seriousness rather than mockery, is to reduce the stigma that surrounds mental conditions, to help audiences see those who struggle as suffering rather than failing, as whole people beneath their conditions. The show's compassionate portrayal of the Ice King helps to destigmatize the conditions he embodies, the obsession and the decline and the loss of self, by showing them with compassion, by revealing the whole person beneath, by treating the suffering with seriousness. The Ice King's portrayal is destigmatizing, the compassionate depiction of mental struggle that helps audiences see those who suffer with understanding rather than judgment. The destigmatizing power is especially valuable because the conditions the Ice King embodies, obsession and cognitive decline and the loss of self, are among the most feared and most stigmatized, the conditions people most dread and most struggle to discuss. By depicting them with compassion, by making the Ice King sympathetic and whole, and worthy of love despite his condition, the show helps to reduce the fear and the stigma around these most dreaded conditions, helps audiences approach them with compassion rather than terror, helps those who struggle with them feel seen rather than condemned. The Ice King's compassionate portrayal is a gift to everyone who fears or struggles with these conditions, the destigmatizing depiction that helps them be seen with compassion. And the portrayal is valuable too for the families and loved ones of those who struggle, because the show models how to love someone through their condition, how to see the person beneath the struggle, how to hold on to the self beneath the decline. Marceline's love for Simon beneath the Ice King, her refusal to give up on the man beneath the condition, models how the loved ones of the struggling might hold on to the person beneath the suffering, might love them through their condition, might see the self beneath the decline. The show offers to the families of the struggling a model of love that persists through the condition, that sees the person beneath, that holds on, and this model is a genuine gift to everyone who loves someone struggling with the conditions the Ice King embodies. This compassionate, destigmatizing, instructive portrayal of mental struggle is among the show's deepest achievements. The willingness to depict the most feared conditions with compassion and seriousness, to reduce their stigma, to model how to love through them. And it flows from the Ice King's obsession problem, from the show's honest and compassionate treatment of his condition, the obsession and the decline rendered not as comedy or villainy, but as genuine suffering, worthy of compassion. The Ice King's obsession problem is, in this light, a landmark of compassionate mental health portrayal, the depiction that helps audiences understand and families cope, and the stigma reduce, the suffering rendered with the compassion it deserves. For anyone watching who struggles with their own mental conditions or loves someone who does, the Ice King offers this gift, the compassionate portrayal that says you are not alone, you are not failing. You are a whole person worthy of love beneath your condition, and you can be loved through it, seen beneath it, held on to despite it. The Ice King's obsession problem, treated with compassion, is a message to the struggling and their loved ones. The reassurance that mental struggle is suffering rather than failing, that the self survives beneath the condition, that love can persist through it. And this message is among the most valuable things the show offers, the compassionate vision of mental struggle that helps the struggling feel seen and their loved ones know how to love them. So the Ice King's obsession problem is, finally, more than a character study, it is a landmark of compassionate portrayal, a destigmatizing depiction of mental struggle, a model of love through condition, a message of hope to the struggling and their families. The show took the most feared conditions and rendered them with compassion, made the Ice King sympathetic and whole, and worthy of love, and in doing so offered a genuine gift to everyone touched by mental struggle, the compassionate vision that reduces stigma and models love and offers hope. The Ice King's obsession problem is the show's compassion toward mental suffering made into a character, and it is among the most valuable and humane things the show ever achieved. Let us gather the Ice King's journey together now, gently. As the night deepens, the whole arc of his obsession from its origin to its lifting. He began as Simon, a devoted, loving man, devoted to his fiancée Betty, devoted to the young Marceline he protected, his capacity for deep, loyal love his defining quality. He found a crown, and the crown took his mind, eroding his self while amplifying his fixations, turning his beautiful devotion into compulsive obsession, his loving care into the compulsion that grasps. He became the Ice King, trapped in the compulsive kidnapping of princesses, reaching obsessively for the connection the crown had taken, his unmoored devotion seeking substitutes for the love he lost. He wrote his fanfiction, building in words the connection he could not find in life. He grew more lonely, his obsession deepening his isolation deepening his obsession, the spiral worsening across the centuries. He suffered beneath the comedy, the genuine suffering of a man trapped in a compulsion he could not control, reaching forever for a connection his very method made impossible. And at last, after 1,000 years, the crown's hold was broken, and Simon returned, the obsession lifting, the man recovered, the love restored, called back by the persistent love of those who never stopped seeing him beneath the fixation. From devoted man to compulsive Ice King to recovered Simon, the whole arc of the obsession, from love to compulsion to love restored. Laid out whole, the Ice King's journey is revealed as a story of love distorted and recovered, the beautiful devotion twisted by the crown into compulsive obsession, and finally, after 1,000 years, restored. The man recovered from beneath the fixation. It is a tragedy, the longest and saddest in Wu, and it ends in recovery, the obsession lifted, the love restored. Simon recovered whole, and to have followed it is to have followed obsession itself. From its origin in distorted love through its long tragic grip to its eventual lifting, and to arrive at the show's deepest hope about fixation, that the self survives beneath it, that love can recover it, that even 1,000 years of obsession cannot finally destroy the loving person waiting to be restored. There is rest in this completed arc, the rest of a story that took the longest obsession and brought it finally to recovery. The compulsion lifted, the love restored, the man recovered from beneath the fixation. The Ice King's journey, completed, is not a horror to flee but a tragedy to rest in. The long sad arc that ends in hope. The obsession lifted, the self recovered. And to rest in it, at the edge of sleep, is to rest in the show's deepest reassurance about obsession, that the self survives beneath it, that love can recover it, that even the longest fixation cannot finally destroy the whole loving person who waits, all along to be restored. And as you drift towards sleep, the Ice King's story offers its gentlest comfort, the reassurance that the loops can loosen, the fixations can lift, the self can be recovered, that even the longest obsession is not permanent, that the loving person survives beneath it. Whatever fixations you carry, whatever loops grip your own mind, the Ice King's story reassures you that they need not be permanent, that the self survives beneath them, that recovery is possible, that the loving person waits beneath the fixation to be restored. Let the loops loosen now the way they loosen towards sleep, and rest in the reassurance that the self survives beneath every fixation, that love can recover it, that even the longest obsession lifts in the end to reveal the whole loving person beneath. The man beneath the Ice King was there all along, the loving, devoted Simon waiting beneath the fixation, and he was recovered, at last, through love. And the self beneath your own fixations is there all along, too. The whole loving person waiting beneath whatever loops grip you. And it can be recovered, the show insists, through love, through the persistent care that sees the self beneath the fixation. Rest in that, the reassurance that you are not your obsessions, that the loving self waits beneath them, that love can recover it, and let the Ice King story, the long obsession, lift it at last into recovery. Be the gentle company that holds you as you drift towards sleep, the loops loosening, the self surviving, the love waiting beneath it all to be restored. It is worth dwelling on the specific texture of the Ice King's obsessive life, the daily shape of his compulsion, because the details reveal the depth of his fixation. He surrounds himself with penguins, his gunters, a substitute family, a flock of companions standing in for the connection he cannot truly form. He fixates on his appearance, his schemes, his elaborate plans to win the love he cannot win. He returns again and again to the same compulsive behaviors, the same doomed reaching, the daily texture of his life shaped entirely by his obsession. And these details, the penguins and the schemes and the compulsive returns, fill in the picture of a life consumed by fixation, every day shaped by the obsession, every behavior bent toward the compulsion that grips him. The penguins are particularly poignant because they are the Ice King's substitute family, the companions he surrounds himself with in the absence of the connection he truly longs for, the flock standing in for the love he cannot form. He is not entirely alone, he has his gunters, but they are substitutes, stand-ins, the companions of a lonely man who cannot form the genuine connection he longs for, and their presence underscores rather than relieves his loneliness. The substitute family that cannot replace the real connection his obsession cannot achieve. The penguins are the Ice King's loneliness made visible, the substitute companions of a man whose obsession prevents the genuine connection he surrounds himself with substitutes to approximate. The comedy that surrounds all of this, the laughter the Ice King's behavior usually provokes, functions as a mask, a way the show lets the audience approach the tragedy without being overwhelmed by it. By making the Ice King funny, the show lowers the audience's guard, lets them grow fond of him through laughter, and then, once they are attached, reveals the tragedy beneath, the obsession and the loss and the suffering. The comedy is the delivery system for the tragedy, the laughter the mask over the sorrow, and the audience's journey with the Ice King is the journey from laughing at him to aching for him, from finding him funny to understanding his suffering. The comedy masks the tragedy until the audience is ready to feel it. This journey from laughing at the Ice King to aching for him is one of the show's most masterful achievements. The way it transforms the audience's relationship to a character from mockery to compassion, from laughter to love. We begin by laughing at the bumbling villain and his pointless schemes, and we end by aching for the broken man and his lost love. And the transformation is gradual, masterful, the comedy slowly giving way to the tragedy as the show reveals the suffering beneath the laughter. And this journey mirrors the show's whole lesson about the Ice King. The movement from seeing him as a joke to understanding him as a tragedy. From mocking his obsession to feeling compassion for his suffering, the audience's own growth in compassion enacted in their changing relationship to the character. There is something valuable in this journey, this growth from mockery to compassion, because it models how we might come to understand the people we initially dismiss or mock, the way deeper knowledge transforms judgment into compassion, laughter into understanding. We initially laughed at the Ice King, we came to ache for him, and the journey models how our initial judgments of people might be transformed by deeper knowledge into compassion, how the people we dismiss might, on fuller understanding, become the people we ache for. The Ice King teaches through the audience's own journey with him, the way deeper knowledge transforms judgment into compassion, the way the dismissed become, on fuller understanding, the beloved. And this transformation from mockery to compassion is perhaps the deepest gift of the Ice King's whole portrayal, the way it leads the audience from laughter to love, teaching, through their own changing relationship to the character, the compassion that fuller understanding brings. We learned, watching the Ice King, to transform our mockery into compassion, our laughter into understanding. And this learning extends beyond the show into our relationships with the people we initially dismiss, the way fuller knowledge might transform our judgments into compassion. The Ice King teaches compassion through the audience's own journey, the growth from laughing at him to aching for him, a model of the compassion that understanding brings. The Ice King's obsession, then, is not only a study of fixation, but a teacher of compassion. The character whose tragedy, revealed beneath the comedy, leads the audience from mockery to love, teaching the compassion that fuller understanding brings. And this teaching is among the show's deepest gifts, the way it uses the Ice King to grow the audience's compassion, to transform laughter into understanding, to model the way deeper knowledge turns judgment into love. The Ice King's obsession problem is finally a lesson in compassion, the tragic fixation that teaches the audience, through their own journey from mockery to love, the compassion that understanding brings to even the most dismissed and mocked. There is a particular reason this matters, which is that the people who struggle with obsession, with compulsion, with mental conditions are so often mocked, dismissed, judged, exactly as the Ice King is initially mocked. And the show's transformation of that mockery into compassion models a better way of relating to them, by leading the audience from laughing at the Ice King to aching for him. The show teaches a compassion for the obsessed that counters the mockery they so often receive, models the understanding that should replace the judgment, the love that should replace the laughter. The Ice King's journey from mockery to compassion is a lesson in how to relate to the struggling, the transformation of judgment into understanding that the obsessed and the mentally struggling deserve. So, the Ice King's obsession problem teaches, through its comedy and its tragedy and the audience's journey between them, a deep compassion for the struggling, the transformation of mockery into understanding, of laughter into love. And this compassion is the deepest gift of his whole portrayal, the lesson that the people we mock might, on fuller understanding, become the people we ache for, that the obsessed and the struggling deserve compassion rather than judgment. That fuller knowledge transforms our relationship to even the most dismissed. The Ice King leads us from laughter to love, and the love we learn for him is a love we might extend to all who struggle, the compassion that understanding brings to the obsessed, the mocked, the dismissed, the suffering. This compassion learned through the Ice King is the truest thing his obsession problem leaves us with. The deep understanding that the struggling deserve our love rather than our mockery, that fuller knowledge transforms judgment into compassion, that the people we dismiss might become, on understanding, the people we ache for. And to carry this compassion into sleep is to carry the Ice King's deepest gift, the love we learn for the broken blue wizard, extended toward all who struggle, the compassion that his tragedy taught, the understanding that fuller knowledge brings to the obsessed and the suffering and the dismissed. The Ice King taught us to love the broken, and that love is the gift to carry, the compassion for the struggling that his obsession problem, fully understood, finally and beautifully teaches. The Ice King's relationship with Marceline is the deepest and most healing thread in his whole story, because she alone, for much of the show, remembers who he was, holds on to Simon beneath the Ice King, refuses to let the man be entirely lost in the obsession. Marceline was the child Simon protected, and she carries the memory of his devotion, the knowledge of the man beneath the madness, and her relationship with the Ice King is shadowed always by this knowledge, the love for the man he was, and the grief for the obsession that took him. She is the keeper of Simon's memory, the one who holds on to the man beneath the fixation, and her steady love is part of what eventually helps to recover him. This relationship is among the most moving in the show precisely because Marceline can see both, the obsession and the man beneath it, the Ice King's compulsion and Simon's lost devotion, and she grieves the one while loving the other. To watch Marceline interact with the Ice King is to watch someone hold on to a beloved beneath a condition that has obscured them, to love the man beneath the fixation, to refuse to let the obsession be the whole truth of who he is. And this is a model of how to love someone through their condition, to hold on to the person beneath, to refuse to let the fixation define them, to keep faith with the self beneath the obsession until it can be recovered. The Ice King's relationship with Gunther, his penguin, is gentler and stranger. The bond between the lonely wizard and his strange pet, the companionship that, however inadequate, is real. Gunther is, in his way, the Ice King's family, the companion who stays, the bond that, beneath all the obsession, offers some real connection. And there is something touching in this. The lonely obsessive man and his strange devoted penguin, the bond that persists beneath the compulsion, the small, real connection in a life otherwise consumed by doomed reaching. The Ice King is not entirely without connection. He has Gunther, and the bond, however strange, is real. A small thread of genuine companionship in a life dominated by obsessive longing for the connection he cannot otherwise form. His relationship with Finn and Jake is more complicated. The heroes who oppose him, fight him, foil his schemes, and yet, over time, come to understand him, to see the man beneath the villain, to extend him a grudging and growing compassion. Finn and Jake begin as the Ice King's opponents and become, in a sense, his reluctant friends, the heroes who learn, as the audience learns, to see the tragedy beneath the comedy, the man beneath the obsession. And their changing relationship with the Ice King mirrors the audience's own, the movement from opposition to understanding, from fighting the villain to aching for the broken man, the growth in compassion that the Ice King's tragedy teaches. His relationship with Princess Bubblegum is more distant but no less meaningful, the two of them sharing, in their different ways, the burden of long memory, of carrying the past, of being shaped by the world that ended. Bubblegum, ancient herself, understands something of what the Ice King carries, the weight of long existence, the burden of memory. And though they are not close, there is a kind of recognition between them, the mutual understanding of beings who have carried the past too long. The Ice King's relationships with Marceline and Gunther and Finn and Jake and Bubblegum fill in the texture of his social world. The connections that persist beneath his obsession, the bonds that, however strained by his compulsion, remain real. And these relationships are crucial to his eventual recovery, because it is through them, especially through Marceline's persistent love, that Simon is finally called back from beneath the Ice King. The recovery does not happen in isolation, but through relationship, through the love of those who held on to the man beneath the obsession, who refused to let him be entirely lost, who kept faith with Simon beneath the Ice King. The relationships are the means of recovery, the love that calls the self back from beneath the fixation, the connections that, persisting through the obsession, finally help to lift it. The Ice King is recovered through love, through the relationships that held on to him, through the persistent care that refused to let the man be lost in the compulsion. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This is the show's deepest claim about how recovery from obsession and from mental struggle more broadly happens not through isolation or willpower alone, but through relationship, through the love of others who hold on to the self beneath the condition, who keep faith with the person beneath the fixation, who refuse to give up. Simon is recovered through the love of those who held on to him, and this models how the struggling might be helped, through the persistent love that sees the self beneath the condition and refuses to let it be lost. Recovery happens through relationship, through love, through the care that holds on to the person beneath the struggle, and the Ice King's recovery through Marceline's persistent love is the show's gentle teaching about how the struggling might be loved back to themselves. There is profound hope in this for anyone who loves someone struggling with obsession or mental condition. The suggestion that their love matters, that holding on to the person beneath the condition matters, that keeping faith with the self beneath the struggle can help recover it. Marceline's love helped recover Simon, and this insists that the love of those who care for the struggling is not powerless but powerful. That holding on to the person beneath the condition can help call them back, that the persistent care of loved ones is part of how recovery happens. For anyone loving someone through their struggle, the Ice King's recovery offers hope, the reassurance that their love matters, that holding on matters, that the self beneath the condition can be recovered through the love that refuses to give up. And there is hope too for anyone who struggles themselves, in the knowledge that they might be loved back to themselves, that others might hold on to the self beneath their condition, that they need not recover alone but might be helped by the love of those who refuse to give up on them. Simon did not recover alone. He was loved back to himself. And this offers hope to the struggling, the reassurance that they might be loved back too. that others might hold on to them beneath their condition, that recovery might come through the love of those who refuse to let them be lost. The struggling need not recover alone, the Ice King's story insists. They might be loved back to themselves, as Simon was, by the persistent care of those who hold on to the self beneath the struggle. So the Ice King's relationships, and especially Marceline's persistent love, reveal the show's deepest hope about recovery, that it happens through love, through the care that holds on to the self beneath the condition, through the persistent love that refuses to give up. And this hope is among the most valuable things his story offers. The reassurance that the struggling might be loved back to themselves, that the love of those who care matters. That recovery happens through relationship, through the persistent care that holds on to the person beneath the fixation until they can be recovered. The Ice King was loved back to himself, and this is the hope his story offers. The reassurance that love can recover the self from beneath even the longest obsession, that no one needs struggle entirely alone, that the persistent care of those who refuse to give up can call the self back from beneath the condition. This vision of recovery through love is the warm heart of the Ice King's whole story. The obsession that grew from love finally lifted through love. The fixation that was the distortion of devotion finally healed through the persistent devotion of those who held on to the man beneath. Love distorted into obsession, and love recovered the self from beneath the obsession. So that the Ice King's whole arc is, at its heart, about love. The love that the crown distorted, and the love that finally healed. The devotion twisted into fixation, and the devotion that called the self back. The Ice King's obsession problem is beneath everything. A story about love, the love that became obsession, and the love that recovered the self from beneath it. And the love wins, in the end, recovering Simon from beneath the fixation that love itself had become. It is worth reflecting on why the Ice King became, for so many viewers, not the villain he began as, but one of the most beloved characters in the show, because his journey from villain to beloved tells us something about compassion itself. He started as an antagonist, an obstacle, a joke, and he ended as one of the most cherished figures in the series, mourned and loved and celebrated, and the transformation in the audience's feeling toward him is one of the show's quiet triumphs. We came to love the Ice King not despite his obsession and his brokenness, but because, understanding them, we saw the suffering and the devotion beneath, and the seeing transformed our judgment into love. The Ice King became beloved because the show taught us to understand him, and understanding became love. This transformation from finding the Ice King a villain to loving him as one of the show's most cherished figures is the deepest proof of the show's compassionate vision, the demonstration that understanding transforms judgment into love, that the figures we initially dismiss can become, on fuller knowledge, the figures we cherish most. The Ice King's journey in the audience's heart from villain to beloved is the show's compassion enacted in the viewers themselves, the growth in understanding that turns judgment into love, the fuller knowledge that transforms the dismissed into the cherished. And this enacted compassion is among the show's deepest gifts, the way it grows the audience's capacity for understanding by leading them to love a figure they began by dismissing. The Ice King's beloved status also reflects how deeply his suffering resonated. How many viewers recognized in his obsession and his loneliness and his loss something of their own struggles, found in him a mirror of their own fixations and longings and griefs. We loved the Ice King partly because we saw ourselves in him, in his lonely reaching, his doomed longing, his fixations, and his griefs. And the recognition deepened our love, the mirror of our own struggles, making him not a distant villain but a familiar fellow sufferer. The Ice King became beloved because he was a mirror, because his suffering resonated, because in his obsession and loneliness we recognized our own, and the recognition transformed him from villain to beloved fellow sufferer. There is something healing in loving a character who mirrors our own struggles, because to love the Ice King, to extend him compassion, is, in a sense, to extend compassion to the parts of ourselves he mirrors, our own fixations and longings and griefs. In loving the broken, obsessive, lonely Ice King, we learn to love the broken, obsessive, lonely parts of ourselves, to extend to our own struggles the compassion we extend to his. The Ice King's beloved status is, in this way, a kind of self-compassion. The love for the character who mirrors our struggles, teaching us to love the struggling parts of ourselves. The compassion for his obsession extending to our own. To love the Ice King is to learn to love ourselves more gently, in the parts that mirror his struggle. This self-compassion, learned through loving the Ice King, is among the most valuable things his story offers. Because so many of us judge ourselves harshly for our own fixations and longings and griefs, condemn in ourselves the very struggles we might meet with compassion. And the Ice King, by teaching us to love the broken, obsessive, lonely figure, teaches us to extend the same compassion to ourselves, to meet our own struggles with the understanding we extend to his, to love the struggling parts of ourselves as we learn to love him. The Ice King teaches self-compassion, the love for the broken character extending to the broken parts of ourselves, the compassion for his struggle becoming compassion for our own. For anyone who judges themselves harshly for their own fixations, their own loneliness, their own doomed longings, the Ice King offers this gentle teaching, the invitation to extend to themselves the compassion they extend to him, to love their own struggling parts as they learn to love the broken blue wizard. You are no less worthy of compassion than the Ice King. His story insists your fixations and longings and griefs are no less deserving of understanding than his. And the love you learned for him is a love you might extend to yourself, to the struggling parts of you that mirror his struggle. The Ice King teaches you to love yourself more gently, to extend to your own struggles the compassion his story taught you to feel. And this self-compassion is a gentle thing to carry into sleep, the invitation to meet your own struggles, your own fixations and longings and griefs, with the compassion you learned for the Ice King, to love the struggling parts of yourself as gently as you came to love him. Whatever you judge in yourself, whatever struggles you condemn, the Ice King invites you to meet them instead with compassion, to extend to yourself the understanding his story taught, to love yourself in your struggles as gently as you loved the broken, obsessive, lonely wizard who mirrored them. Carry that self-compassion into sleep, the gentle love for your own struggling parts that the Ice King's story teaches, and rest in it, meeting yourself with the compassion you learned for him. So, the Ice King's obsession problem in leading the audience from judgment to love teaches finally a self-compassion, the love for the broken character extending to the broken parts of ourselves, the understanding we learned for him becoming understanding for our own struggles. And this self-compassion is among the deepest gifts of his whole story, the invitation to meet ourselves in our fixations and longings and griefs, with the gentle understanding we learned to feel for the Ice King. We came to love him, understanding him, and the love teaches us to love ourselves, in the parts that mirror his struggle, with the same gentle compassion. The Ice King teaches us to be gentle with ourselves, and that gentleness, that self-compassion, is the warm gift to carry. The love for the broken wizard become a love for our own broken parts, the compassion that understanding brings, extended, at last, to ourselves. It is worth placing the Ice King's story within the larger achievement of the show's treatment of its broken characters, because Adventure Time made a habit of taking figures who began as villains or jokes and revealing, beneath them, genuine tragedy and the possibility of redemption. The Ice King is the clearest example, but the pattern runs throughout, the show consistently finding the wound beneath the villainy, the suffering beneath the joke, the person beneath the condition. And the Ice King's obsession problem is the fullest expression of this habit. The most complete example of the show taking a figure of comedy and villainy and revealing, beneath him, one of the most genuine tragedies and most hopeful redemptions in all of animation. This habit reflects the show's deepest moral conviction, that almost no one is simply a villain or a joke, that beneath nearly every figure is a wound and a story and the possibility of redemption, that the dismissed and the mocked and the feared are, on fuller knowledge, suffering people worthy of compassion. The Ice King embodies this conviction fully, the figure of comedy and villainy revealed as a tragedy worthy of the deepest compassion, the joke become a heartbreak, the villain become a beloved. And the show's willingness to do this, to find the tragedy beneath the comedy and the person beneath the condition, is among its deepest moral achievements, the compassionate vision that refuses to let anyone be merely a villain or a joke. The Ice King and Simon together constitute one of the great tragedies of television, a tragedy that unfolds across a whole series, revealed gradually, deepening over years, until the full weight of it lands with a force few televised tragedies achieve. The slow revelation of Simon beneath the Ice King, the gradual deepening of the comedy into heartbreak, the eventual recovery after 1,000 years, all of it constitutes a tragedy of remarkable scope and power. One of the most genuine and moving tragedies the medium has produced, and it is all the more remarkable for being achieved within a children's cartoon. The great tragedy of the Ice King unfolding within a show, ostensibly for the young, the heartbreak hidden beneath the comedy until its full weight could land. That a children's cartoon could produce a tragedy of this scope and power is part of what makes Adventure Time exceptional, the way it achieved, within its candy-colored form, a genuine tragedy worthy of the great tragedies of any medium. The Ice King's story is not a children's cartoon approximation of tragedy, but the real thing, a genuine and moving tragedy of obsession and loss and recovery, achieved within a form that most would assume incapable of it. And this achievement, the genuine tragedy within the children's cartoon, is among the show's deepest claims to greatness. The demonstration that the form could hold real tragedy, that a cartoon could break your heart as deeply as any drama, that the Ice King's story is a tragedy worthy of the name. And the tragedy's eventual turn toward recovery, Simon's restoration after 1,000 years, makes it not merely a tragedy, but a tragedy with redemption, a heartbreak that ends in healing, a loss that ends in recovery. Most tragedies end in loss. The Ice King's ends in recovery, the man restored after 1,000 years, the obsession lifted, the love recovered. And this turn from tragedy to redemption is part of what makes the Ice King's story so moving. The heartbreak that does not end in heartbreak, but in healing. The tragedy that becomes, in the end, a story of recovery. The loss redeemed at last by the restoration of the man beneath the fixation. This redemptive turn reflects the show's fundamental hopefulness. Its refusal to let even its deepest tragedies end in mere loss. Its insistence that even the most broken might be recovered. That even the longest obsession might lift, that even the deepest tragedy might end in healing. The Ice King's story could have ended in tragedy, the man lost forever to the obsession, and instead it ends in recovery, the show's hopefulness insisting on the restoration of the man beneath the fixation. And this redemptive hopefulness, applied to the show's deepest tragedy, is among its most moving qualities, the refusal to let even the Ice King's 1,000-year tragedy end in mere loss, the insistence on recovery, on healing, on the restoration of the loving self beneath the obsession. For anyone who has watched a loved one struggle with a long condition, who has feared that the person beneath might be lost forever, the Ice King's redemptive turn offers a particular and precious hope. The reassurance that even after a long struggle the person might be recovered, that even the longest condition might lift, that the loving self beneath might be restored. Simon was recovered after 1,000 years, and this insists that recovery remains possible even after the longest struggle. That the person beneath the condition is not necessarily lost forever. That hope remains even after years of struggle. The Ice King's redemptive turn is hope for everyone who fears a loved one lost to a long condition. The reassurance that recovery remains possible, that the self beneath might yet be restored. This hope that even the longest struggle might end in recovery is among the most precious things the Ice King story offers, especially to those who have watched long struggles and feared their outcome. The reassurance that Simon was recovered after 1,000 years, that the loving self survived even the longest obsession, that recovery remained possible even after all that time, offers a hope that long struggles do not always end in permanent loss, that the person beneath might yet be restored, that even the longest condition might, in the end, lift. The Ice King's story holds out this hope, the precious reassurance that recovery remains possible even after the longest struggle, the loving self-recoverable, even after the longest obsession. It is worth slowing down to ask what obsession actually is, because the word gets used loosely, and the Ice King's particular affliction is precise enough to deserve a precise understanding. Obsession, in its truest sense, is not simply caring about something a great deal. It is the involuntary return of the mind to a fixation, again and again, against the will, a thought or a need that loops back no matter how often it is set aside, that demands attention it was never granted, that intrudes into the quiet and will not leave. The obsessed mind is not free to think of other things, because the fixation keeps pulling it back, keeps reasserting itself, keeps closing the loop that the sufferer would give anything to open. And this is exactly the Ice King's condition, a mind pulled compulsively back, over and over, to the same fixation, the capture of a princess, enacted not once but endlessly, a loop he cannot break. What makes his case so poignant is that the loop is not really his. It was installed in him by the crown, the cursed object that gave him power and took his mind, that rewired the gentleman he had been into the compulsive creature he became. His obsession is, in the most literal sense, a symptom of a kind of possession, the crown's slow overwriting of his self. And this matters because it locates the obsession outside his true character, marks it as an affliction rather than a choice, something done to him rather than something he is. The compulsive kidnapper is not the real man. He is what the curse made of the real man, and the real man is buried somewhere beneath the loop, helpless, watching his own mind enact a fixation he never chose. And here is the detail that transforms the whole thing from comedy into tragedy, the detail that explains what the obsession actually is underneath. Before the crown took him, the man he had been was engaged to be married, deeply in love with a woman named Betty, and the crown took her from him as it took everything else, drove her away as it drove his mind away, left him with the wreckage of a love he could no longer even remember clearly. And his compulsive pursuit of princesses, his endless capturing of women to be his bride, is the distorted echo of that lost engagement, the obsession a broken reenactment of the love the crown destroyed, his fractured mind reaching, over and over, for the bride it lost, in the only garbled way it still can. Seen this way, his obsession is grief, grief that cannot complete itself. Grief frozen into compulsion. Healthy grief moves through loss toward eventual acceptance, but the Ice King cannot grieve properly because he cannot even remember clearly what he lost. And so the grief has nowhere to go, cannot resolve, and instead loops endlessly as compulsion, the mind reaching again and again for the lost beloved without ever being able to name or mourn her. His princess kidnapping is mourning with no memory of the dead, longing with no object it can clearly see, a love that survives the destruction of the mind that held it, and gropes blindly compulsively for the shape of what it lost. That is a far sadder thing than mere villainy, and it is the truth the show slowly, devastatingly reveals. This brings us to the crucial distinction the whole story turns on, the difference between love and obsession, which look similar from outside but are opposite in their nature. Love, in its healthy form, is oriented toward the good of the beloved, wants the other to flourish, to be free, to be happy even apart from us. Obsession is oriented toward the relief of the obsessed, wants the fixation resolved, the loop closed, the need met, and treats its object not as a person to be cherished, but as a thing required to soothe an unbearable internal pressure. The Ice King's pursuit of princesses is obsession, not love, precisely because it does not care about the princesses as persons, does not want their flourishing, wants only to fill the role his broken mind keeps reaching to fill. And this is why his captures are frightening rather than romantic, because the women in them are objects to his compulsion, not beloveds to his heart. And yet the unbearable poignancy is that underneath the obsession, in the buried original man, there was real love, the genuine cherishing love he once felt for Betty, the love that wanted her good and not merely her presence. The Crown took that healthy love and twisted it into compulsion, took the man who could love rightly and made him a creature who could only fixate, and the tragedy is the distance between the love he was once capable of and the obsession he was reduced to. He is not a creature incapable of love. He is a creature whose love was deformed into obsession by a curse. And somewhere beneath the deformation, the capacity for true love survives, waiting, as it will eventually prove, to be restored. The obsession with princesses was not his only compulsion, of course, because the Crown's distortion spread through his whole life, leaving him a creature of strange repetitions and fixations and hoarded comforts. He surrounds himself with penguins, treats them as companions and family, names them and talks to them and depends on them in a way that reveals the depth of his need for any connection at all, however one-sided. He keeps to strange routines, fixates on small things, behaves throughout with the repetitive, ritualized quality of a mind seeking the comfort of the familiar against the chaos it cannot otherwise manage. His whole existence has the texture of compulsion, the reaching for repeated comforts, the building of small rituals against the void, and the princess obsession is only the most visible peak of a personality, the Crown remade entirely in the shape of fixation. There is something deeply human in those smaller compulsions, in the penguins and the routines and the hoarded comforts, because they are recognizable. Because we all reach for small, repeated comforts against the chaos and loneliness of existence. All build our little rituals, all have our fixations we return to for the relief of the familiar. The Ice King's compulsions are an exaggeration of an ordinary human strategy, the use of repetition and fixation to manage an unbearable internal state. And that is part of why he is so strangely sympathetic beneath the comedy. Because his coping, however distorted, is a version of the coping we all do, the reaching for the familiar loop when the open world becomes too much to bear. Underneath every one of these compulsions, driving all of them is the engine that powers nearly all obsession, which is loneliness, the unbearable ache of isolation that the fixation exists to soothe. The Ice King is profoundly, catastrophically alone, isolated by his madness, feared and avoided by everyone, cut off from the connection he most desperately needs, and his obsessions are his frantic, broken attempts to fill that isolation, to manufacture the company and the love and the comfort that he cannot earn or keep. The princess kidnapping, the penguins, the rituals, all of it is the activity of a creature trying not to be alone, reaching compulsively for connection because the alternative, the full unmediated experience of his own isolation, is more than he can bear. This is the deepest truth of his obsession, that it is loneliness wearing the mask of fixation, the frantic activity of a being trying to escape the void of its own isolation. And it is why the obsession can never satisfy him, because the thing he actually needs is not a captured princess, but genuine connection, and the obsession by its very nature cannot produce that. Each capture fails to soothe him because it was never the real need, only the distorted symbol of it. And so the loop must repeat endlessly, because the compulsion keeps reaching for a substitute that can never fill the actual lack. The obsession is a hunger pointed at the wrong food, and so it can never be fed, only repeated, which is the prison of all obsession and the particular hell of the Ice King's lonely loop. It is worth asking why the show plays so much of his obsession for comedy, why a condition this tragic is so often the source of laughs. Because the comedy is not careless, and it does real work. The humor around the Ice King functions as a kind of mercy, both for him and for us, a way of making an unbearable affliction bearable to watch, of letting us spend time with a deeply sad creature without being crushed by the sadness. Comedy has always done this, made the unendurable endurable, let us approach the things that would otherwise be too painful to face. And the laughter the Ice King provokes is partly the laughter that protects us from the full weight of what he is, a buffer between us and the tragedy underneath. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the comedy serves him too, within the world of the show, because it is part of how the other characters tolerate him, how they keep him in their lives despite the genuine harm his obsession causes. If he were only frightening, only tragic, he would be unbearable to those around him, would have to be cast out entirely. But because he is also absurd, also funny, also strangely endearing in his compulsions, the others can keep him close, can forgive him, can maintain the connection that he so desperately needs. The comedy is, in a sense, what saves him from total exile. The quality that lets a community tolerate a creature whose behavior would otherwise be intolerable. And there is a strange kindness in that, the way his absurdity preserves the connections his obsession would otherwise destroy. Beneath the comedy, though, sits one of the most frightening questions the show raises through him, the question of whether an obsession, given long enough, simply becomes the self, overwrites the person until there is nothing left underneath but the fixation. For most of the series, the gentleman named Simon is so deeply buried beneath the compulsive Ice King that he seems entirely gone, replaced, the obsession having consumed the identity so thoroughly that the original person appears not to exist anymore. And this is the deep terror of any long fixation, the fear that if you loop long enough, you will become the loop, that the obsession will not just afflict the self, but replace it, that there will come a point where the distinction between the person and the fixation collapses entirely. The show takes this fear seriously, lets the Ice King appear, for long stretches, to be nothing but his obsession. The original Simon seemingly extinguished, and the horror of that is real. The horror of a self so overtaken by compulsion that it has apparently ceased to exist. To watch him is to watch the worst-case outcome of fixation, the total colonization of a person by a pattern, and it raises the unsettling possibility that our compulsions, our loops, our obsessions, if indulged or inflicted long enough, might do the same to us. Might not merely trouble the self, but slowly become it, until the person we were is buried past recovery beneath the thing we cannot stop doing. Nowhere is the collateral damage of his obsession clearer than in his relationship with the vampire queen Marceline, who knew him before the crown took him, who was a child cared for by the gentleman he used to be, and who must now watch that man appear and vanish inside the compulsive creature he became. Their relationship is one of the show's most quietly devastating, because she remembers who he was, holds the memory of the kind protector he had been, and has to witness that person flicker in and out of the obsessed stranger who wears his face. The obsession did not only harm the Ice King, it robbed her of the man who had loved and protected her, left her grieving someone who is technically still alive, still present, but no longer himself. And that particular grief, the grief for someone lost while still living, is one of the cruelest the show ever portrays. This is the wider truth that the Ice King's story illuminates, that obsession is never a private affliction, that it radiates outward, harming everyone who loves the obsessed, who must watch the person they care for vanish into the fixation. The loved ones of the obsessed grieve a living person, lose someone who is still there, must hold the memory of who the person was against the reality of who the obsession has made them. And that is its own deep suffering. The suffering of those who love someone consumed by a compulsion. The Ice King's obsession is a tragedy not only for him, but for everyone who remembers and misses the man beneath it. And the show honors that wider damage, the way a fixation wounds the whole web of love around the one it afflicts. And yet, against all of this darkness, the show offers one of its most hopeful and hard-won gifts: the eventual revelation that the obsession was not permanent, that the man beneath it was not gone but only buried, that even the longest and most total fixation could, under the right conditions, lift. When the cursed crown is at last removed, the gentleman named Simon returns, surfaces from beneath the decades of compulsion, proves that he had been there all along, dormant, waiting, not extinguished, but only suppressed. The self survived. The obsession had not become him after all, had only covered him, and beneath the covering the whole loving person remained, ready to be restored, which is the most hopeful thing the show could possibly say about the terror of fixation. This recovery matters enormously because it answers the deep fear the obsession raised, the fear that a self could be permanently overwritten by a compulsion, and answers it with hope, with the reassurance that the person beneath the fixation is not destroyed but only hidden, that even after the longest obsession, the true self waits to be recovered. It does not promise that recovery is easy, or guaranteed, or available to everyone, but it insists that it is possible, that the self can survive even total apparent erasure, that beneath even the most consuming fixation, the whole person may still be there, dormant, recoverable, waiting for the curse to lift. And for anyone who has feared being consumed by their own loops, that reassurance is a profound comfort. The promise that you are not your obsession, that you survive beneath it, that you can be recovered. It is honest, though, about the cost, because the recovery does not undo the years that were lost, does not give back the decades the obsession consumed, does not erase the harm done to those who loved him through the long affliction. Simon returns, but he returns into a world changed by his absence, carrying the grief of all he did and lost while the obsession held him, and the recovery is therefore bittersweet, a genuine restoration shadowed by everything the fixation cost along the way. This honesty is important because it refuses the easy fantasy that recovery erases the damage, and insists instead on the truer, harder hope that recovery is real and possible and worth everything, even though it cannot undo the suffering that came before it. What the Ice King's whole story finally offers, then, is a complete and compassionate portrait of obsession, from its installation by a force outside the self, through its function as displaced grief and frantic loneliness, through its terrible capacity to seem to become the self and to wound everyone who loves the afflicted, all the way to the hard-won hope of recovery, the surfacing of the buried person, the lifting of the longest loop. It is one of the most thorough and humane treatments of compulsion that any story has offered, dressed as the tale of a silly ice wizard, and its final word is not despair, but hope, the reassurance that the self survives beneath the fixation and waits, always, to be restored. And there is comfort in carrying that complete portrait into sleep, because so many of us know some version of the loop, some fixation the mind returns to against our will, some compulsion we cannot quite set down. And the Ice King story meets us there with understanding rather than judgment, and with hope rather than despair. It says that the loop is not your fault, that it is often the distorted form of a grief or a loneliness or a love that has nowhere else to go, that it does not make you a monster but a sufferer, and that beneath it, the whole loving self survives, waiting to be recovered. To fall asleep holding that is to be gently reassured about your own loops and longings, to be reminded that you are more than your fixations, that the person beneath them endures. So let the Ice King's long obsession be, tonight, not a frightening thing, but a deeply human and finally hopeful one. The story of a gentle man buried beneath a curse and recovered at last by love, the proof that even the longest compulsion can lift and the truest self return. Let it reassure you about whatever loops you carry, and let it ease you with its hard-won hope toward the rest that is itself a kind of loosening, a setting down of the day's fixations, a gentle release of the mind from all its loops into the open quiet of sleep. There is a useful way to understand The Crown that deepens everything, which is to see it as the show's image of addiction, because The Crown behaves exactly as an addiction behaves. It offers power, relief, a kind of escape, and in exchange it slowly takes the self, demands more and more, rewires the mind around its own continuation, until the person exists to serve the thing, rather than the thing serving the person. The Ice King, put on the crown for understandable reasons, reached for the power and protection it offered, and it took him the way an addiction takes a person, gradually, seductively, replacing his priorities with its own, hollowing out the self while promising to fill it. His obsession is the obsession of the addicted, the compulsion of a mind colonized by the very thing it reached for to feel better. Seen as addiction, his story gains another layer of recognizable human truth, because so many people know the bargain the crown represents. The thing reached for in pain that slowly becomes the source of greater pain, the relief that becomes a need, the escape that becomes a prison, and the show's treatment is compassionate in exactly the way our understanding of addiction should be, locating the affliction outside the person's true character, refusing to mistake the addicted behavior for the real self, holding on to the buried person beneath the compulsion. The Ice King is not his addiction any more than any addicted person is their addiction, and the show's insistence on the man beneath the crown is the same insistence compassion requires toward anyone caught in a compulsion they did not fully choose. Consider, too, what the obsession stole, because the cruelest tax any fixation levies is time, and the Crown took an almost unimaginable amount of it. The Ice King lost not years but centuries to his obsession. 1,000 years of compulsive repetition, of looping fixation, of a life that could have been lived consumed instead by the endless reenactment of his affliction. And while his timescale is fantastical, the theft is real and recognizable, because that is what obsession does. It eats time, devours the hours and days and years that could have been spent living, replacing a life with a loop. The saddest accounting of any fixation is the simple sum of the time it took, the living it displaced, and the Ice King's 1,000 stolen years are the show's enormous image of that ordinary universal theft. This raises a question worth sitting with. The question of where the line falls between healthy devotion and unhealthy obsession, between passion and fixation, because they are not always easy to tell apart from inside. A great love, a deep dedication, a consuming passion can look, from the outside, like obsession. And the difference is not the intensity but the effect, whether the devotion enlarges the life or shrinks it, whether it connects you to the world or isolates you from it, whether it serves your flourishing or consumes it. The Ice King's fixation is clearly the destructive kind, isolating, shrinking, consuming. But the question it raises is a live one for anyone with a passion. The question of whether the thing you love is growing your life or eating it. And it is worth asking gently of our own devotions now and then. One of the truest things the Ice King's recovery reveals is that he could not do it alone, that the lifting of his obsession required others, required the people who remembered who he was, who held the memory of his true self when he could not hold it himself, who loved him through the affliction and were there to welcome the man back when the curse finally lifted. The vampire who remembered the gentle protector, the friends who tolerated the absurd, compulsive creature, all of them kept a space open for the real Simon to return to, and without that space, that held memory, that stubborn love from outside, the recovery might not have been possible. This is a deep truth about recovery from any fixation, that it is rarely a solitary achievement, that it usually requires others who hold on to who you really are when you have lost the thread yourself. There is enormous comfort in that, the recognition that we do not have to recover from our loops alone, that the love and memory of others can hold our true selves in trust until we are able to reclaim them. That connection is not just what obsession destroys, but what heals it. The Ice King's isolation fed his obsession, and his eventual reconnection helped lift it, and that arc, from the loneliness that breeds fixation to the connection that heals it, is the show's quiet prescription, the suggestion that the answer to the lonely loop is finally not willpower but love, the held memory of others, the space they keep for the self we have temporarily lost. It is worth noticing how directly all of this speaks to the particular experience of lying awake at night, because the night is when the looping mind is loudest, when the fixations we hold at bay through the busy day come back to circle, when the intrusive thought returns and will not let the mind rest. Almost everyone knows some version of the nighttime loop, the worry or regret or longing that the dark amplifies, the fixation that keeps the mind from settling. And the Ice King's affliction is, in a gentle way, a mirror of that universal experience. The mind caught in a loop it cannot break. To understand his obsession is, in part, to understand our own midnight loops, and to be offered hope for his is to be offered hope for ours. And the hope the show offers translates directly into a way of meeting your own looping mind tonight, which is with compassion rather than struggle, with the understanding that the loop is usually a grief or a loneliness or a love that has nowhere to go, and that fighting it only feeds it. The Ice King could not force his obsession away, and you cannot force your loops away either, but you can hold them gently, can recognize them as the distorted reaching of a tender heart, can let them be without surrendering to them, and can trust that beneath them your true settled self is waiting, as Simon waited, to be restored to peace. The loop is not you. It is something passing through you, and like all the Ice King's compulsions, it can lift. So as you lie here at the edge of sleep, if your own mind begins to loop, if some fixation returns to circle in the dark, let the Ice King's story be your gentle companion, the reassurance that the looping mind is a sufferer rather than a sinner, that the self survives beneath the loop, that connection and compassion heal what struggle and isolation only worsen. Hold your loops the way the show holds the Ice King, with understanding and mercy and the patient knowledge that beneath them you are whole, and let that mercy soften the loop, loosen its grip, and allow you to drift, gently, past the fixation and down into the open quiet of rest. Let the looping ease now, the way his eventually eased, and let the compassion the show extends to its most fixated character extend. Tonight, to you, to whatever you cannot stop turning over, whatever returns and returns in the dark. You are not the loop. You are the whole self beneath it, and that self is tired and allowed to rest, and the loop, like every one of the Ice King's compulsions, can be set down, can be loosened, can be released into the gentle dark where the mind finally stops circling and sinks at last into sleep. There is a final tenderness worth naming, which is how the show, even at its most comedic, never lets us fully forget the man beneath the wizard, never lets the Ice King become merely a joke. Small moments keep surfacing the buried Simon, a flicker of clarity, a sudden sadness, a glimpse of the gentle person trapped inside the compulsive one. And these moments are the show keeping faith with him, refusing to let the obsession have the last word about who he is. Each glimpse is a quiet promise that the real man is still there, a thread of recognition the show holds out across the whole long affliction. And those threads are what make his eventual recovery feel earned rather than arbitrary. Because we were shown, all along, the person who was waiting to return. That refusal to reduce him to his obsession is the show's deepest act of compassion toward him, and it models how we might hold the afflicted in our own lives, never letting the compulsion become the whole of how we see the person, always keeping faith with the self beneath it. To look at someone caught in a fixation and still see, beneath it, the whole person they are and could again be, is one of the kindest things one heart can do for another. And the show teaches that kindness through the Ice King, trains us to look past the loop, to the loved person trapped inside it. And so his obsession, fully understood, becomes not a thing to fear or mock, but a thing to meet with the deepest human sympathy, because it is finally a story about a gentle person afflicted by a force beyond his control, isolated and grieving and looping, and recovered at last by the patient love of those who never stopped seeing the man beneath the curse. There is nothing in that, in the end, to trouble the sleep, only a deep and gentle reassurance about affliction and recovery, about the survival of the self beneath even the longest fixation, about the power of held love to recover a person from the deepest loop. Carry that reassurance into the dark with you now, the gentle knowledge that obsession is an affliction and not an identity, that the self endures beneath it, that love and time and connection can lift even the longest compulsion, and that beneath every loop, including your own, a whole and loving person waits, like Simon, to be restored. Let it soften whatever you carry, and let it ease you with its hard-won and compassionate hope toward rest. In the end, the Ice King endures in memory not as a villain, but as one of the most quietly sympathetic figures the show ever made, a creature whose every absurd compulsion concealed a wound, whose every kidnapped princess was a garbled reach for a love he had lost, whose every strange ritual was a small defense against an unbearable loneliness. To remember him rightly is to remember the man beneath the wizard, the love beneath the obsession, the gentle Simon beneath the cursed Ice King, and to hold all of it together with the compassion the show spent so many years teaching. That whole, tender, complicated understanding is the truest thing to carry away from his story, and the gentlest thing to hold as you drift towards sleep. So, the Ice King's obsession problem, placed within the show's larger treatment of its broken characters, and recognized as one of television's great tragedies, is finally a story of tragedy redeemed, heartbreak healed, the longest obsession lifted into recovery. And it offers, through this redemptive turn, a precious hope, the reassurance that even the deepest tragedy might end in healing, that even the longest struggle might end in recovery, that the loving self survives beneath even the longest condition, waiting, like Simon, to be restored. The Ice King's story is a great tragedy, and it ends in hope, and the hope it offers, that recovery remains possible even after the longest struggle, is among the most precious gifts the show ever gave. And to carry this hope into sleep is to carry the Ice King's deepest gift, the reassurance that the broken can be recovered, that the longest obsession can lift, that the loving self survives beneath the fixation and waits to be restored. We followed the Ice King through his long tragedy and into his recovery, and we carry from the whole arc this hope, the precious reassurance that recovery remains possible, that the self survives, that love can restore the loving person from beneath even the longest struggle. Rest now holding that hope, the long tragedy of the Ice King redeemed into recovery, the loving Simon restored from beneath the obsession, the reassurance that the broken can be healed, and the lost recovered carried gently into the dark of sleep. So we come back at the very end to where we began, to the Ice King kidnapping a princess, the compulsive act repeated past all reason, the obsession that defined him. We began with that doomed compulsion, the man trapped in a loop he could not break, reaching forever for what he could not grasp. And now, having followed his whole story, we can see that compulsive kidnapping, for what it truly was, not a joke, not the random scheme of a villain, but the wreckage of a beautiful devotion, the unmoored longing of a man whose love was taken from him, the obsession that was the distortion of Simon's capacity for love. The compulsive kidnapping was the ruin of a love story, the doomed reaching of a devoted man whose crown had taken his beloved, the obsession the wreckage of a beautiful soul. And we can see, too, that the compulsion was not permanent, that the man beneath it was recovered at last, that Simon returned, the obsession lifted, the love restored. The doomed compulsive kidnapping we began with was not the end of the Ice King's story, but a stage in it, the long tragic grip of an obsession that finally, after 1,000 years, released, revealing the loving, devoted man beneath. The compulsion lifted, Simon returned, the love was restored, and the obsession we began with was revealed, in the end, as a distortion that could be lifted, a fixation that the self could survive, a compulsion beneath which the whole loving person waited, all along, to be recovered. That is the entire story of the Ice King's obsession, from the compulsive kidnapping to the recovered Simon, the obsession that was the wreckage of love and the recovery that restored it. And it is a story to carry gently into sleep, the reassurance that obsession is not the self, that the loving person survives beneath the fixation, that even the longest compulsion can lift to reveal the whole self beneath. The Ice King's obsession problem ends not in the doomed compulsion we began with, but in the recovered Simon, the love restored, the self recovered, the obsession revealed as a distortion the loving person survived. The compulsion was real, and it was not the end, and the love beneath it was recovered at last. So let the Ice King rest now, his obsession understood, his recovery reached, the compulsive kidnapper revealed as the wreckage of a devoted man, and the recovered Simon as the proof that the loving self survives beneath the fixation. There is nothing in his story finally to trouble the sleep, only the gentle reassurance that obsession is not the self, that the loving person survives beneath it, that even the longest compulsion can lift, that love can recover the self from beneath the fixation. The Ice King's obsession lifted, Simon returned, and the love that was the obsession's distorted form was restored at last to its true and healthy shape. Rest now, held by that reassurance, the long obsession lifted into recovery, the loving self restored from beneath the fixation, the compulsion revealed as a distortion, the whole person survived. And if you carry your own fixations, your own loops, your own compulsive longings, let the Ice King's recovery be your comfort. The reassurance that the self survives beneath them, that love can recover it, that even the longest obsession lifts, in the end, to reveal the whole loving person who waits. All along, beneath the fixation to be restored, the man beneath the Ice King was recovered, and the loving self beneath your own fixations waits to be recovered too. And that is a gentle thing to fall asleep holding. The reassurance that beneath every obsession is a whole loving self waiting, like Simon, to be restored. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.